Hi all, this is Amo Raju again in the Ambassador Talks. And this week, the guest today needs absolutely no introduction. He's a legend in Derby, has been for many, many years. Mr. Sati Rana from the Aajkal program, who for decades with his team won countless awards for the city and was a pivotal player in the Asian music, Bhangra music scene. And so he's joining us today to talk about life in general, and hopefully you'll get to know more about both of our thoughts. Over to you, Sati.
Amo, thank you so much. It's great to be here. You've got a fantastic setup here. I love it. I love it. And it's great to be able to talk kind of freely with somebody who's a fellow Derbian.
Well, like you, I think this city is the centre of the universe, and all good things sprout from here with its industrial heritage. And then obviously, your parents and my parents came here, settled all those decades ago, and made this their home, and thankfully so have we, and our children too. So it's just really get your thoughts about what it's like to be here and being of South Asian heritage in this wonderful city.
Well, there has to be some attraction here because we've been here for over 50 years and we've not moved. And I often think, my parents, they were born in India. I was born in India as well, but they were born in India. And, in their 30s, they came over here, built a life and so on. And I'm thinking all I did was move from Pear Tree to Stenson Fields to Littleover. That's been my kind of journey. So, opportunities have arisen to move out of Derby. I've not worked in Derby apart from radio for about 35 years. I've worked in Birmingham, Nottingham, London, and so on. So I could have moved anywhere. But for some reason, there's an attraction here. Because of the community that we belong to. It's a close-knit community. Absolutely. And you've grown up with people, so you're part of something. And secondly, Derby is positioned really well in the country. It's in the middle. Unfortunately, we haven't got the sea, the coast, or anything, which I love. Yeah. But in terms of transport, it's fantastic. You can go anywhere in the country from here, whether that's by road or by rail or whatever it is. It's really accessible. And thirdly, the quality of life is just great. And I travel around the country and I see and I think, well, actually, what Derby offers in terms of education, health and so on, it's second to none.
Absolutely. And I mean, one of the things that I always think about is, I used to ask my granddad and my dad, why Derby? Yeah. There was if you go to other cities where the Punjabi community particularly settled, like Southall and Birmingham, and they pretty much said what you just said. It was a nice little environment. Everybody knew everyone. We all got on with each other. And the idea was that particularly the men, they used to go to work and they worked those horrible jobs that you and I wouldn't even last 10 minutes in those foundries and those dirty, sooty environments. And then they'd go to the pub and my dad even said that his foreman used to give him a shilling to go and buy a pint of beer after his shift.
And they needed that. Having worked in foundries, where it was really hot and dusty work, you needed beer. And, when I speak to some of that first generation, they said we used to drown, 6-7 pints in an evening, no problem. Yeah. And it was because they had to get rid of that heat and that dust in their throat and everything, and beer helped it. So.
For medicinal purposes only. You try telling that to a doctor today, they wouldn't accept it. But yeah, I mean, it's a great place to be, and let's not forget, the women as well. They had a difficult job in this city. They came, probably didn't know the language, and they settled here, and they. My mum used to say we didn't know where to get garlic and ginger from and chilies and turmeric, and there was only one or two shops that had it, and and even they, today you don't get a delivery, but in those days they delivered.
They did deliver.
You used to go and order it, and then by the end of the day they'd deliver it to your house.
Yeah, I remember, a local shopkeeper used to come to our house with a notebook, take down whatever you needed, and then it'll be delivered a few days later. So
it was a great time, and growing. I was a young lad in the 70s and a teenager in the 80s, and you came along with the Aajkal program, and wow, did it blow Derby into the universe in terms of the exposure that we had in this city. And I remember every single Bhangra music artist wanted to come to Derby and came to Derby on a Friday night. Yeah, I can remember just driving past your studio thinking, who's going to be in there? It was great, absolutely great.
It was just a different time, time the agalla, and we were, in the right place at the right time, I think, and all of us that were involved in radio at that time were young, and we were part of that scene, and we wanted to be part of that scene. So we created a platform, not by design or anything. It just happened, and we thought, everybody who comes, all the bands and all the singers, artists, they're all similar age, similar backgrounds, and so on. So we just kind of became really good friends, and it wasn't a case of trying to get somebody in. They used to ring and say, "When are we coming?" I said, "You can come this next Friday if you want." So it was just fantastic. It was more than a radio program. People used to say, even at the radio station, it's on a Friday evening, it's like a youth club, and it had that feel. Even our team, a radio program, 2-hour radio program, probably has a couple of people.
Yeah.
We had 6, 7, 8 people,
I remember.
involved in just putting this program together. Everybody had a role to play, and everybody wanted to be part of it. And it was like an open door. It was literally, it was a youth club, and it was just fantastic.
And you're right, because I was in a band at the time, and we'd go around other cities and do interviews as well. But the vibe that you had in Derby, it was, and I was just so fortunate. This was my home city, so I could remember when my album came out, I rang you guys up and said, "Here's the album. Please promote the track." And you did, and it was just so nice that I was in the mix with all these great big players like DCS and Apna Sangeet and Hira and Alap and all these wonderful bands, and it was great because you had this, like you said, you had a great connection with the bands.
Yeah.
You were all around the same age, and it kind of made it also the listeners were of the same age. So there was a magnetic kind of pull from on all directions to the studio.
And I think part of it was that they didn't come for an interview, just an interview. They used to come for an evening out. Because after the program, we would spend the evening together, go for a meal, go for drinks and so on. So they knew, all the bands knew that if they came to Derby for an interview, it wasn't just an interview, it was an evening out with us. and that kind of helped to establish that rapport with people. And that was reflected on air as well. So people felt a part of this party that we used to have on air with these bands and so on, and the banter and play the music, have a chat. They felt a part of it. And I suppose we're talking about kind of 80s where young people didn't have social media. There wasn't much on television in terms of or Netflix or anything like that. So the opportunity to go out weren't there either. So it was a case of connecting with young people on air and being part of that kind of, that conversation.
And don't you think it's great now? Look at where the Bhangra music industry in the UK is today. Yeah. It's on unimaginable heights. People like Diljit Dosanjh is worldwide now, and even he's recorded here in Derby. And don't you think it's great that with the history of that music scene, Derby had a massive role to play in it.
It had a massive role, and I think the bands who started Bhangra music, and we promoted it on air and so on. We created something which became global. Yeah. It was the seeds, wasn't it? Absolutely. Punjabi music was in Punjab. It was folk music in Punjab.
Yeah.
But what these bands did, and everybody involved in that Bhangra movement in the 1980s and 90s, what they did was planted the seeds outside of Punjab into Britain. And from Britain, it became so well known that people in Canada, America, and all over the place kind of, resonated with British Bhangra music. And even people in Punjab wanted that kind of music and so on. And that gave the impetus for artists around the world to say, well, if they can do it in the UK, we can do it as well. and artists from Canada and so on, and then people like Diljit, the next generation of young artists from who were born and grew up in Punjab, but emigrated to Canada, America, and so on. Thought there's a platform, there's an international platform. So I'd say that Bhangra music in the UK created an international platform, which is now being used, and they're taking it. I mean, Diljit's taken it to a different level. It's unbelievable,
It's
where he is
massive,
at the moment.
absolutely massive, and long may that continue, because it's isn't it great that you can't watch a Bollywood film now without it having a Punjabi song in it. And a lot of that's got to do with the fact that the whole world is connecting with that. I remember being in the band, and we had some Western musicians in there, and they were fascinated by the tumbi. They go, this one string instrument, it makes people want to get off the seats and dance. It's that one string instrument's doing that.
Not a guitar.
It's not a guitar with all these fancy kind of chords and all that kind of stuff. No, it's just one string and a little drum with 2 elephant skins on the side or whatever. It's just great that we could make this music, and it's come from raw folk music to next level kind of with bass and guitars and beats and stuff.
And good songs, they can have all of that, modern instrumentation, but the bass of it is that tumbi and the dole and the tolki.
Absolutely, so as we say, long may it continue. So, where do you think the industry is going next? Where do you think Punjabi music is going next? When do you think Derby's got a role to play in it?
Well, Derby has a role to play with it. I think if we look at the likes of Diljit Dosanjh and Karan Aujla and so on, AP Dhillon, that they're creating, that they're taking Punjabi music on that world stage now. And I think, there is a role for Derby to play. And Derby does play a role, with True School, who's produced a lot of the hit tracks from Diljit and Karan Aujla and, so on. So there is a role to play. I think the problem, the challenge will be language.
Yeah.
Youngsters now growing up here don't have the language, don't have the ability to sing in Punjabi. Now, you can say, look, we can put the toll beat in and sing in English. It's not going to cut it.
No,
when you've got people, currently in places like Canada who are recent arrivals, so they've still got the language there. And I think, I've been to Canada so many times, and I think the Canadians there have kept that language going more than what we did. Yeah. We kind of abandoned it over the years, over the 50 years and so on. Yeah, I can speak, you can speak Punjabi, I can speak Punjabi and so on. But, it's diminishing slowly, isn't it?
No, you're absolutely right. When I started, I think I was one of the first Punjabi singers to come out of Derby, and, I could get by.
Yeah.
I could, even now I can still hold a pretty conversation. I can go to the Punjab, and a lot of people still think I'm actually born in the Punjab. But the next generation that singers that followed me, God, their level of Punjabi was, it was old school. Yeah. And, you cannot compete with that. Yeah. And so I could, there's no doubt now that, apart from the likes of someone like JK locally, I've yet to see any homegrown singers who can really kind of cut the mustard when it comes to talking.
I'm not saying there won't be. I think that there will be, but you're really into an area where you've got to have the singing talent and the language in one person, and that gets difficult. That's a challenge. But having said that, we're in a global community, so it doesn't matter. You can get vocalists from anywhere. Yeah. So there is a role to play in Derby, from producers. Everybody in that chain of command in terms of putting music out there, from promoters and so on. So I think you just find your niche and get in there and do it. I couldn't sing. I can't sing a note. But we had a role to play in terms of radio.
You may say you can't sing a note, but we've got AI now, so it'll help you.
well, I was just going to get to that. We're entering into a world where I can ask any one of the AI platforms to say, write me a Punjabi song. Yeah. And it will, and I've done it, and it does that.
Yeah.
And the next stage will be, okay, now compose some music to go with this. Yeah. And then I will say, well, okay, I want a vocalist that sounds a bit like Daljeet with a bit of Karan Aujla in there,
Yeah.
right? And it will create
It'll probably
me, the
do that.
vocalist.
Yeah.
So I think we're entering into an arena where, you know, even the established artists like Daljeet and so on, they are keeping an eye on this, and they know that eventually something is going to happen where people will create their own music.
Yeah.
You
I
know,
mean, it's just strange because I was on, as you know, I'm on TikTok, and I was scrolling, and as I saw this variation. It was Muhammad Rafi's voice singing one of the latest songs that have come out from Bollywood. And I thought, how have they done that? And that's with AI.
that's what that AI will recognize that voice
Yeah.
and put those lyrics and that beat and match the two together.
And you know, someone who's been who's died 40 plus years ago, singing a modern song, and I think they'll do the same with Elvis and Sinatra and stuff. So you know, you can see that the technology is there, and there's a danger that we'll lose some of the authenticity.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and there's a danger with all of those. But I think you can't stop it.
No,
you're not going to be able to stop it. You know, you can't you know, governments can try and regulate, but you know, technology is going to take over. I mean, just look at television and films and radio and so on. At one time, people used to have to sit there at that specific time to watch that specific program that they were fed. Now you've got everything on your phone. You've got kind of TikTok videos, Instagram videos, and so on. A lot of them are more entertaining than what you find. I was actually listening to an interview by a movie director in India. And he said, you know, there was a time when we used to be creative. He goes, now I look at TikTok and think, blimey, how did they shoot that scene?
Yeah.
You know, and he goes, I copy them. So we're getting into a situation where youngsters are using technology to become more creative.
And they will be the next generation Spielbergs, and you know, they'll do it from their bedroom because they know how to use software that you.
But
and
you're
I
right; it's not real.
No, it isn't.
It's not real.
That's sad. That's sad,
you know, even kind of music videos, you can make a whole film without any actors. You know, just have AI create actors and images and so on. And they're so realistic. A lot of Hollywood films use AI, have been using it for years anyway, you know, like Matrix and so on. So they've been using that. So you will not know what is real and not. And that's where humanity will need to take a step back and think, right, okay, it's fine, you know, all of that, but it's not really real.
Yeah, you're right, absolutely right. So let's get back to the people who settled here and made this city their home. One of the things I find that's quite sad, actually. You know, I get approached so many times, and you probably do as well. That generation seems to be, their stories are forgotten. Some of the hardship, like you said earlier on, you and I have imposter syndrome compared to when we look at what our parents went through. You know, they went through some real challenges just to get here, and I find it quite sad that there's a whole generation, future generations will not understand those sacrifices and that journey. What do you think we can do about making that kind of story, you know, permanent in the history of the Punjabi community that's settled here, or the South Asian community in general, whether you're from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, wherever you came from to settle in the UK?
Well, whatever it is that we can do, we better do it fast because we're now at the tail end of that generation. A lot of those people have passed away, and you know, they've taken those stories with them, and I think, you know, all of this kind of media technology that we have now has come about 10, 15 years too late for that generation. They had stories. You know, we're talking about a generation that was born during the British colonial rule in India. You know, had you know, lived in an India that was one country, a unified country. Went through partition, went through the independence movement, and some of them took part in that independence movement, went through partition, and maybe moved from one country to another, and then came all the way here with £3 in their pocket, and then raised their families and built businesses, occupation, whatever it is. Whatever we're reaping the rewards of, it's on, you know, based on their hard work and so on. So there's a massive story to tell there. but we've not captured it. And
We
and I
haven't.
think there aren't many people around that that can kind of
I find
narrate
it,
that story. And we better start capturing it now.
I find it quite sad because there's a lot of, there's children and who've got elderly parents living either with them, or they've got grandparents, who only live a few streets away, and they don't spend enough time with them. And if they do, they're talking about how busy their own lives are.
Yeah.
And I'm fortunate. I was one of I was one of 28 grandchildren my grandparents had.
Yeah.
And I was I can confidently say I was probably one of the only ones that spent time and said, "Tell me what happened. Tell me what during partition. Tell me what happened about coming to the UK. How did Granddad get that visa to come to the UK?" And then hearing those stories, you start capturing. I've written a little book just for my own descendants, so they know how the family actually came here, and etc. And I think it's important that children spend just half an hour a week when they go and see their grandparents. Half an hour a week and say, "Tell me about your life. Tell me what you did. Tell me the struggles you had. If I'm sitting in an air-conditioned office today, tell me about the dirty jobs you had to do so that I could be where I am today." And I think that's important.
It is important. So it's not just about recording here. It's about every individual person capturing
Capturing it.
that story from their family and passing it on. And that way, those stories will remain with people. But you're right in the sense that people don't have time to do that. The kind of third generation, there's now becoming a language barrier between them and their grandparents and so on. So I suppose the onus is on us. We're the glue between that generation and that generation to be able to capture it and pass it on. So
That's a big responsibility in some aspects because I want to talk to as many. I mean, I was involved in a mini kind of documentary to some extent where I captured the story of about 10 or 12 people in Derby City, and I know that's been repeated across the UK. And there are so many more that I would have loved to interview, but funding doesn't allow it for a start. And then people are just so busy getting people together with a camera team and saying, "Tell me yourself." Plus, it takes a lot to actually for someone to just volunteer that experience.
It does, and it's not a case of getting somebody sitting here and saying, "Right, let's talk."
Doesn't happen.
You've got to work with them over a period of time to get them to open up and get them to reflect back in terms of expressing. It's not just a visual storytelling, it's how they felt. You want to capture their feeling. What was it like landing at Heathrow Airport in the middle of winter, in a country you knew nothing about? I can remember it because I was 8 years old when I came here, and I'd never seen a white person in my life before the first white person I saw was at Delhi airport.
Right.
And previous to that, I remember very distinctly asking my family, because, when I found out we were going to go to this place called England, well, what are people like? Do they have arms and legs like we do, nose, ears? And so, it was that, we're talking about a period where there was no televisions, so you couldn't see people and you couldn't see their pictures in papers necessarily. So, when I came to Delhi airport, I saw white people. I thought they're just like us, except that they're white. Their color is pale than us and so on.
I think it's fascinating, those kind of observations that an innocent child can make. I always, when I used to try, when my granddad passed away 30 plus years ago now, around 30 years ago, and trying to get any information out of him because he went through partition of India and it was painful. He would never talk about it. My grandmother, she'd quite happily say this happened and that happened, but my granddad would never do it. So we used to have to give him a couple of shots of rum. After a couple of shots of rum, the stories came out, and boy, were they powerful and scary. He told me that a bullet missed his head. They were in a Lahore camp, and a bullet missed his head by about half an inch. And years later, that story was actually corroborated because I saw somebody else saying that there was a fire at the Lahore camp. it kind of
But there was a lot of violence.
There
They
wa-
went through a lot of violence and a lot of hardship. So it was painful, and it wasn't just the physical violence that they might have experienced, but the what they saw
yeah.
other people go through.
They said they had to. My grandmother said they had to step over dead bodies
Yeah,
consistently throughout the night because they had to travel during the night to
Yeah.
avoid the violence.
yeah,
And you and I couldn't even comprehend that. We couldn't think that now, could we?
No.
But they had to go through that.
yeah,
And there was another observation I made recently when I was talking to a lot of this generation that came and settled in the UK. I realised that a good portion of them had, whether you were from India or whether you're from Pakistan, you were, if for example, my granddad was from Chak 100 in near Lalpur. It's now called Faisalabad. And they went over to the eastern side of Punjab. And he was never settled. For the following 15 years or so, he was just not settled. And he had to uproot again. He goes, I need to go somewhere else to make my home. And I realized that was the case for so many people. They just once whether they moved from one side to the other, it just wasn't their home. They had to settle, go somewhere else. And that was something I found to be quite a common denominator in the stories.
and that's where the attraction to travel to England came.
Yeah.
Because they were almost kind of trying to build a life from refugee camps,
Literally.
whether that was in Pakistan, whether that was in India, and so on. And so it never felt like home. They thought, well, we better try something else. And when the kind of work permits opened up and the voucher system opened up to come to the UK.
I've still got my granddad's
I know,
voucher.
we've got one as well.
I framed it.
Yeah, when they opened up, they thought, well, okay, let's try that as well. So, like you, I've spoken to so many people, and that's what they said. They said we hadn't settled completely, so we hadn't been able to build a home that we could call a home, even though we were in our own country and everything. So the opportunity to go in somewhere else. And remember India at that time, we're talking about 1947, 48, 49. India was left in a very destitute position, from 25% world GDP to 2%. So people were trying to find their place. India was trying to find its place in the world at that time. So any opportunity you would grab, this was like a safety line for people. And so they kind of used that opportunity to, you've got nothing to lose. Let's just go for it.
You used the word refugee earlier on, which, you and I switch on the TV today and we see what's going on across the the world, and you cannot watch a news program without hearing the word refugee said a dozen times. And my granddad and many others like him, they were refugees. When they went from one side to the other, you just can't. It's hard when I try and explain that to my children and the younger generation in general. They just don't get it. No, we weren't refugees. No, those are people on the TV. They're the refugees. And I say, well, hang on, no, it's exactly the same thing happened. They had to uproot. All they had was their pots and pans.
That's right.
And they left. My grandmother said that when they left the village in Pakistan, the cattle was following them. And the cattle had tears in their eyes. Because the cattle realized these people are going. And my granddad had to hit the buffalo with a stick and say, go back. And then the rest of the villagers pulled the cattle back. And that tells you, some of the pain that was involved in that story. And, and again, the word refugee, it's said too easily now by newsreaders, and our families went through that, and we
they were refugees in their own country, and yes, eventually it became 2 countries and then 3 countries and so on. But they, if you 3, 4, 5 generations of your family is in Lialpur and grew up there, and then suddenly you've got to pick up your pots and pans and try and escape from there, 50 miles down the road, and you're in a different place altogether, and you haven't got your home, you haven't got your connections, you haven't got anything. And when the lands were relocated, they didn't necessarily relocate to where your family originated from.
No.
It was wherever it was available. So
literally
you
was.
had to build that life
Yeah,
up again, you know,
yeah.
from scratch.
It's kind of scary, but you know, touch wood. Thank God we are where we are, and that generation made the sacrifices it did, and Derby is our home, and we're all settled. Touch wood, and back to that point that we made earlier. You know, that generation, mums and dads, they sacrificed a lot. You know, I was in India about 20 years ago, and talking to somebody in the Punjab, and he goes, tell me something. He goes, why is it that all the the Indians who live in Europe, when they come to the Punjab, why do they all walk with the shoulders all shrugged and they're half bent over, and they don't look that old,
Yeah.
but they're walking as if they're 80, 90 years old. I says, you don't know the work that they had
Yeah.
to do.
Yeah.
They had to carry 100 weights up ladders, and they had to work in dirty conditions in the cold without any health and safety.
Yeah.
And so that generation's feeling it now today.
Yeah.
So again, we are absolutely grateful to that generation.
Yeah. We are. They set the kind of roadmap to where we are now. But you know, the world changes. The world continuously changes. We don't know what's around the corner and so on. So it's incumbent on us to pave the way for future generations. And what we've just talked about, you learn from that, and you make sure that those mistakes aren't made in the future, and that it's a safer and secure environment for them.
Well, hopefully, touch wood, and I'll quote my granddad again. One of the things he always used to say, he goes, "Don't take anything for granted. You're comfortable today. Tonight you might not be."
Well, we can see that around the world.
That's happening everywhere.
Even in 2024, there is nothing that is constant.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, Sati, it's been absolutely great talking to you, and you're going to be having your own little program here soon. So, looking forward to watching those. And to you guys, make sure you tune in when Sati starts his program, and I'll see you again next time.